Hey everybody, welcome to Cheeseology with Adam. I'm Adam. Today we're going to start with the first blue cheese in a blue cheese series. I'm going to be making 4 blue cheeses in this series. We're going to start with a Stilton English blue cheese today, and then we're going to progress through some other popular blue cheeses as well. If you're not familiar with blue cheese is not just a single cheese, it's a family of cheeses. It's when you hear people say, I don't like blue cheese, it's like saying I don't like beer. You have Budweiser, and then you have Guinness Stout, and everything in between. It's kind of how blue cheese is. So stay tuned, stick around, and we're going to jump right into this Stilton blue cheese making video. All right, we're going to start making our Stilton English blue cheese by using 4 gallons of milk. I'm just using pasteurized milk. So we're going to want to dump our milk in to our pot and then heat it up to 86 degrees. For this cheese, we're going to need calcium chloride and rennet, like we normally use. And then I'll be using penicillium roqueforti, PV style, the blue mold powder. And then for the culture, I'll be using MM100. Per the ingredient list that I showed you, we're going to add our MM100 and also our penicillium roqueforti once this is at temperature, and then we'll let the milk acidify, and then we will add our rennet after that. But we'll get to all those steps here shortly. So right now we're just monitoring the temperature and getting it up to 86 degrees, and then we will move on to adding our cultures. Now that our milk has reached 86 degrees, now we're going to add an 1/8 teaspoon of MM100 bacteria culture, and then also a 1/16 of a teaspoon of the penicillium roqueforti blue cheese mold powder. All right, our milk has been ripening for the last 30 minutes after we put the cultures in and also the blue mold powder. Now what we're going to do is add our rennet. We want to add 2.25 milliliters of rennet, or 0.45 of a teaspoon. So just under a half a teaspoon. And now I'm going to stir this in real well. Don't want to be splashing the milk. Just stir it up and down motions, make sure it's thoroughly mixed in. And then we're going to put the lid back on. If you have a towel, wrap a towel around the pot to try to maintain the temperature. But we're going to let this sit for 60 minutes, and then we'll come back. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to ladle the curd into, I have a bowl with a cheesecloth that's sanitized. I'm going to ladle the curd into this. A little bit different. Usually we're cutting the curd, stirring it a little bit, but for this cheese we're just going to ladle the curd out. Reason for that is we want a moist cheese for this blue cheese. So by stirring it, it actually dries out the cheese. It expels away from the curd after you cut it. All right, now that we have our curd ladled into our 2 bowls, I had to use 2 bowls here for all the curd. You're going to see the whey is going to start rising to the top. In 90 minutes, we're going to come out, we're going to drain that whey off, and then let it set. Like I said, the pH should be about 6.47. We want to do that a couple times. We'll do it at 90, we'll do it at 30, and then we'll have about a 2 to 4 hour span that will let it sit like this as well. But I'll go over the pH levels where it should be at that point. But for right now, you have a 90-minute break. All right, it's been a couple hours. Our curd has been sitting in our pans or our bowls with the whey draining out and kind of just filling up around it. I've dumped them a couple times in the last few minutes. And as you're doing this, you're going to see the whey comes out really fast. My bowl's already filling up with whey a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test the pH. The ultimate goal here is to have the pH at 5, or about 5.5 before we start salting. So what's happening while this is sitting in the whey, we're letting the bacteria work on the lactose and create lactic acid. So it's acidifying the cheese, which is what we want to a certain point. I'm looking at about 5.9 in this bowl. This is good. Like I said, the worst thing we want is for it to be too low. So we're still at a good spot. I'm gonna let these set a little bit more. I'll fold them back up, the cheesecloth, and let the whey kind of drain out a little bit. and I'll dump it every so often, maybe once an hour, or maybe once every half hour, and I'll keep a close eye on the pH level. As we're dumping this whey out, we want to kind of make a little bag out of the cheesecloth and tighten it up a little bit. We want to kind of tighten it up every time that we dump whey out. Once we get to 5.5, we're going to pull that curd out. At that point, it should be stable enough to pull out of there, and then we're going to cut it into about 4-inch size chunks, and then we'll go from there. All right, our curd has been sitting wrapped in our cheesecloths that we've been tightening over the last few hours, and then draining off the whey. We've been monitoring the pH. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwrap the cheese. I'm just going to break it into large, like 4-inch size chunks. I'm going to put it in one bowl. I'm going to leave it like that and turn it about every 30 minutes, kind of like turn the pieces over. And our ultimate goal here again is to get down to 5.5 pH. Pull it out of our cheesecloth. I'll cut this one up. As you can see, I'm just cutting these into kind of like slabs, as you can see. All right, our curd is now at about 5.5 pH. Now what we want to do with the pieces that we cut earlier is just break these up into like kind of walnut size pieces. And what I'm going to do is we want to weigh the curd because we're going to salt this now, and it's going to be 2.5% by weight of curd. And when we add the salt, we're going to want to do kind of 2 phases. Put half of it in, mix it up real good, let it soak in for a little while, maybe a half hour, and then put the rest in and mix that up and let that soak in. Shouldn't be all gritty when you put it in the form. The salt will absorb into the curd. We are at 69.74 ounces. Okay, we're at about 4.3 pounds. So the math on this comes out to 1.74 ounces of salt I need. So it's a little bit lighter than I expected. Probably just lost a little bit more whey than I thought I would. So I'm gonna measure that out. Perfect. Okay, this is extra salt. Keep that away. So I transferred the curd into the larger bowl. I'm gonna put half this salt on the curd, and then I'm gonna mix it up real well. That's about half. I'm going to cover this up just to keep any kind of dust or anything off of it. Let this sit for about 15 minutes, and then I will use the rest of the salt, and then we will put it in our forms after we let that batch soak in. Okay, so we've added all of our salt. What we're going to do now is we're going to loosely pack this into our sanitized form, and then what we want to do over the next hour is flip this over a couple times, probably once every 15 minutes, at least that often, just so it comes together evenly on both sides. What we're going to do is we're going to leave this out in a 70-degree area, roughly around there, that temperature, for the next 3 to 5 days. After we flip it for the first hour a bunch of times, for the next 3 to 5 days, we're going to be flipping it twice a day. I want to keep on flipping that 2 times a day, and then at that point, we'll go to the next step, and that'll last about another 5 days. That's just letting it sit with a bandage around it, basically, some cheesecloth. And then after that, that's when it goes into our aging space. Right now, we're just going to put the curd in the form, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes and we'll flip it over. I'm going to do that by putting this bamboo mat over top of it, and I'm just going to flip it like that. It'll slide down, and then we'll let it sit like that for like 15 minutes. Our curd has been sitting for about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to do our first flip. So I'm just putting a bamboo mat on top, and I'm very quickly flipping it. And now, the reason it's so quick is because you want it all to fall down in one mass, like it did. So now that ensures it will consolidate well on the bottom. That was the hardest part of this cheese, and from here on in, it's going to be easy flips. So we'll let this sit for about another 15 minutes, and then I'll flip it back over, and we'll do that, like I said, through the first hour, every 10 to 15 minutes. And then for the next few days, we're going to only flip it twice a day for the next 3 to 5 days. As you can see, I'm getting a nice blue mold formation. This is after 5 days of flipping it twice a day in a 70-degree area. This is not in my aging space yet. This is just out on my table. I just drape cheesecloth over it to keep any kind of dust off of it. At about
10 days in, then you want to put it into your aging space. As you can see, this is my aging space. At 5 weeks, you want to puncture holes in the top and bottom, about 3/4 of the way through, about 1 inch apart. What this will do is create air channels for the blue mold to grow. From that point, it'll be in your aging space at about 52 degrees, 85% humidity for the next 3 months. And at that point, it's ready for your table. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you've learned something, and happy cheese making.